Hello, everyone. Today we're going over Chapter 7 of the Summa Logicae, which is called the correct account of abstract and concrete names. And in this chapter, Ockham is going to give us his account of abstract and concrete names. So first he goes over the argument for the synonymity of abstract and concrete names in the relevant sense, which is mode 1 from a few chapters ago. He's going to show that the abstract and the concrete names actually signify the exact same thing and thus are synonymous. So the way he does this is by going over all of the different possible ways that they could be distinct, such as signifying different specific natures. Well, in both man and humanity, you're going to have, well, they're going to signify the same thing in the person. Like the man is going to be the same as the humanity in a person. There isn't like the man isn't something distinct from the humanity. They don't have distinct matter or form. If they did, they wouldn't be the same object. They don't have a different composite of matter and form put together, because again, otherwise that object wouldn't have humanity. And finally, there isn't an accident that one has that the other does not share. And he says that this is Aristotle's intended view in Aristotle's writings, specifically that man and humanity are identical. Now, he argues this in a little bit of a roundabout way. He starts by talking about Socrates and Socrates. So Socrates is a concrete term. Socrates is the abstract version of what Socrates is. And he first shows all of these things between Socrates and Socrates where it's a little bit more obvious. And then afterward, he does the same for man and humanity. And this is Aristotle's view according to Ockham. Now, next, there is a theological rebuttal that Ockham presents. And he says that you could predicate of the Son of God that he is a man, but you could not predicate of him that he is humanity. So Christ is a man, but Christ is not humanity. And his argument for this rests on a dependence relation. So Ockham thinks that um, individual men, for their nature, are not dependent on other things, and thus they all have humanity. So humanity as a whole doesn't have a dependence relation on other beings for its identity. However, this is true of Christ. So Christ's humanity is dependent upon his divine personhood, or his divine nature, which supports his human nature. And thus, he is a man, but he's not humanity because of the difference in the dependence relations. Again, if you are a man and you are humanity, then according to Occam, you have no dependency relation on another thing for your identity. But the Son of God does have this dependency relation. So he is a man, but his manness is not identical to humanity. Okay, that's an outline of Occam's position. Now let's jump in here. So he says that humanity only signifies a nature with an intellective soul. It says nothing about being sustained by a divine person or not, and a divine person cannot be the relevant nature that a human person can. And then he says man is a nature composed of body and intellective soul, either residing in no subject or being sustained by another. So it could be either for a man, but it couldn't be either for humanity. Socrates is a nature composed of a body and an intellective soul. So that's just an example. So what sustains Socrates? Does Socrates sustain his nature? This is the important question he's going to illustrate all of this with. Does Socrates sustain his nature? And what he's going to do is he's going to go through different possible meanings of how Socrates could sustain his nature. and show that they're all circular or absurd, and thus absurd. So the first one is just, does Socrates' nature sustain itself? Well, things can't sustain themselves because that would be circular, so you can't have Socrates sustaining himself, so we can't mean that Socrates is his nature, because then it would be self-sustaining. We can't say that Socrates is a composition of nature and difference, because according to Ockham, there is no such composition in man. And even if there was, Ockham thinks that this would entail that a being is actually sustaining two natures. There's a nature with a specific difference, which is Socrates, and then there's the nature with a specific difference, which he is sustaining. And Ockham thinks that it is absurd to have these two different natures in one being. Next, there is a nature with a negation of dependency upon on others. So it's just a nature plus a negation of dependency. Ockham says that this would be absurd to have a being that is both an affirmation and a negation. He says no subsistent thing can be composed of such objects, and it's supposed to be an independent of any subject, but the composite itself is a subject. So we couldn't say that Socrates is a composition of nature plus a negation of dependency, because it would be dependent on those parts. And then he illustrates the point again. The Son of God is a man. This is true because he is in nature composed of body and an intellective soul. Or this is not true because he is in nature composed of a body and an intellective soul, but because he is a subject that terminates the dependency relation of the nature in question, which is what I was outlining as his position earlier. And then he talks about some other assumptions and entailments. One is that there's no syncatagrammatic terms hidden away in the meanings of man and humanity, because they signify the same things. He's assuming that there isn't like a syncatagrammatic term such as like every or some hidden away in the definition of humanity here that he would have to draw out. And then next he says, in all divine cases, humanity and man are different, but in non-divine cases, humanity and man always signify the same thing. Man always signifies humanity except in cases where humanity is something added to some other thing, such as the case of the Son of God. And for non-divine men, it actually isn't proper to say that a man has humanity. It's actually more proper to say that a man is humanity, because man and humanity are the same thing. That would be like saying the block is the block, or the block has the block. It's not that it has the block, it's that it is the block. They are the same thing. So it isn't even proper to speak of these subjects as if they possess the abstract form of their nature. And then finally, he has a definition of the word subject. And a subject is a complete thing, one and not many, and sustained by no other subject, which harkens back to the conversation he had of Socrates and Socrates earlier. And that'll be all for this episode.